I've got a question here. It doesn't say who it's from. It says the US, with the support of the UK, has supplied and sanctioned the use of long-range missiles for Ukraine to strike within the Russian borders. Is this a step too far?
Peter.
Oh, you threw me there, Marie. um, yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure it is. I'm not sure it is a step too far. I think it's one of those you have to be realistic. It's like the end user certificates. It's actually why I disagree with what Ruru was saying about the Gaza stuff, which is that either you sell arms or you don't. Right now, my stance is that you shouldn't. Okay, and the reason why you have end user certificates is that you're supposed to know where the weapons are going. So for us to, Ruru was talking about like the aids getting through, and that's a good thing, and it is. But if at the same time you're shelling the people, so you're selling the weaponry that is then shelling the people, giving them aid is just, we did it in Yemen too. We were the largest provider of aid to Yemen at the same time as the largest arms supplier. So, you'd save a lot in aid money if you stop bombing people. However, we've signed up to defend Ukraine. We've contributed lots in terms of money. We've contributed lots in terms of the sort of technical support in terms of soldiers and everything. And so, does it matter what the receipt is on the missile that the Ukrainians are lobbing in? You're either on their side in this particular context or you're not. And again, if we're comfortable with manufacturing arms and selling it to Ukraine, we can't really moan about it if they're going to send them into the territory they're fighting. And why should they be reactive? It's not like Russia isn't, sending Chinese weaponry or in fact Turkish drones into Ukraine. So, either you're part of the battle or you're not. So yeah.
Drew.
Yeah, I mean, we need to support Ukraine. They've been victims of an illegal war perpetrated by a man who's supposedly elected, but is ultimately a dictator, and has wrought havoc and has been conducting an illegal incursion, an illegal war with Ukraine, with the view to basically stealing territory, sovereign territory from that country. And it's vitally important we continue to do that. Now, that means that when they're being faced with missiles, bombs, bullets, and drones and other pieces of equipment, they have to have the means to defend themselves and to defend themselves from that illegal war that we're seeing Putin wage. So I support more support for Ukraine. I think one of the great tragedies of the Trump situation in America is they've held up aid to going to Ukraine to help through Congress by just gumming up the works. I would say that the one thing I think the UK government and again, occasionally you look for things to try and agree on if you possibly can find them. The one thing the UK government have done is they've been very steadfast in their support for Ukraine, as have all parties across the House of Commons. And I think it's important that we continue to have that shared outlook in terms of protecting the people of Ukraine, because again, there are innocent women, children, and men being killed in that conflict as well by this illegal Russian action.
Rudy.
Well, absolutely. I think the Conservatives have been steadfast in their support for Ukraine, and that's not going away. It's a commitment that will continue to ensure that the Ukrainian army has what it needs to defend itself for as long as they need. Because I do think it is really important to make sure that countries like Ukraine can defend themselves against these kind of invasions. And it is worth saying that as well as that, lessons have to be learned. We've got to be ready to support this as a country, and that's why I was really glad to see that 2.5% GDP commitment to defence spending, to make sure that we stand ready to support our allies, but also ourselves in the global stage. I think it's really important that we have those resources ready, and that we can replenish supplies when they need to be.
That's great. Thanks.
Marie, can I just interject there for a second? I just want to put an interesting another question to them all. There's lots of things there about NATO provocation. America saying that they wouldn't put arms, wouldn't have NATO, wouldn't have Ukraine in NATO and put nuclear arms on their border. So can I just ask a hypothetical question, right? If Canada was to join, say, BRICS, and joined up with the Russians and the Chinese, and if they had nuclear weapons in Canada, would America and the UK or the West see that as an existential threat, the same as Russia do with Ukraine? Is there a difference? Would there be a difference?
Peter.
That is quite the scenario. Yeah, I mean, I suspect America certainly would see it as an existential threat. I think if you had nukes in Canada, Russia would see it as a pretty existential threat as well. Yeah, if they teamed up. I mean, I think that the big difference, of course, is that Canada's a parliamentary democracy, and I don't really see Trudeau changing the constitution in order to allow himself to be re-elected with only 99% of the vote, like Putin. And of course, the other thing is nicking people's territory. I suspect if Canada took Alaska back, and then started heading down to Michigan, the Americans would see it as an existential threat. Yeah. But I'm not going to lie, that is not a geopolitical scenario I've ever considered. That would be a lurch for Canada, wouldn't it?
Drew.
Yeah, I don't think that hypothetical is one that I could, possibly envisage either. I think it's a really interesting thing to maybe have a hypothetical debating society chat about, but I don't think it's a realistic prospect, and I think it'd be difficult to see that kind of scenario. I think it's also really important to say, since we mentioned nuclear weapons, that I'm opposed to, nuclear weapons or their proliferation. I would hope that wouldn't be the case. I know they're a reality in a number of countries. I certainly don't want to see them remain here in Scotland. I think Faslane could be a perfectly brilliant naval base, and actually be patrolling our waters with ships where we've been leaving them open to Russian submarines for pretty much a couple of decades now, without even any air cover or just a single surface vessel going round. So I think there's better ways to defend ourselves than nuclear. But just to come back to Eddie's hypothetical, I don't think I could really give that one a go.
Okay, well, can I just say, Drew, if you think about this, and if you think about the promises that the Americans have made to the Russians over the years, that they've fallen back on. I mean, they said Ukraine would never join NATO and wouldn't be an existential threat to Russia.
Yeah.
So from the Russians' point of view, from the people of Russians' point of view, they would think, that's just a silly question. That's never going to happen. But it has happened, even to the point when this.
Well, I think it's fair that when you look, I spoke to somebody in military intelligence in the British Army a couple of years ago about this very fact, and I think when you look from a historical Russian perspective, and this has to be caveated very heavily with what's going on with Putin, then they have always been feeling under the threat of invasion, be it from the Nazis, be it from the Chinese or the Japanese or whatever, during their time, and they've always felt that feeling of institutional insecurity. But I don't think that kind of goes through, that feeds through into the current situation with Ukraine. They're in an act of aggression. They're looking to expand their borders against their sovereign state on their a neighbouring sovereign state, where they should be looking to build closer relations. And I think the move from the US, the Allies, NATO, and the EU to try and include Ukraine as part of a very wide, and I don't like this expression, but a very wide kind of game of geopolitical chess to try and restrict Putin's ambitions at the moment. So I think some of those promises that were made in the past are probably being broken because of Putin's actions, rather than because we've suddenly decided to change tack on that. But again, these things are what's happening in Ukraine.
In fairness, Drew, if you remember back in the days, Putin was the West's. They were very happy with him. So I don't think it's his actions that he's done. I would say it's more the actions of NATO. But anyway, let's not get too far away. Just as the point you said about Putin.
Yeah.
Zelensky, as of May the 20th, is no longer the elected head of Ukraine. He's now the de facto leader. So, there's a problem there, isn't there?
Well, I think in times of actual war, there are things that have to happen. And I don't think anybody is seriously calling for Zelensky to go during the defense of the nation of Ukraine at the moment. And I think that would be very unusual if anybody was doing that. I'm sure that the thing that Ukraine and indeed Zelensky would want to do as quickly as possible is get back to normality, for the war to end, their territory to be reinstated to them, and for them to be able to have the free elections that they should have, because I know they want to join the European Union, and that's a condition of being able to do that.
And how will there ever be peace there, Drew? Because there's no discussion between Putin and Biden and the Biden administration. They just don't do diplomacy anymore. I mean, Russia's been on the table for a long time.
Look, I have to admit my limitations in terms of I'm not in the room with these high-level negotiators in terms of what they're doing in different scenarios or international dialogue during this particular conflict. And yes, of course, my views are going to be fairly simple compared to those who are dealing with this on a day-to-day basis in that conflict scenario. But what I can see very clearly is Putin's launched an illegal invasion. He's in territory in Ukraine. He's looking to push that forward. They've been pretty heinous by using different groups of mercenaries as well as their own conscripts and army to prosecute this illegal war. And I think Ukraine are doing everything they can to try and reassert their status as a sovereign state.
Sorry, can I just add one thing to what Drew was saying, or just a couple of things? I mean, I think I take what you're saying, Eddie. When you take that historical long view, a lot of what Russia is doing is they're looking for the warm water port, aren't they? They've always felt very insecure. That Western push. If you read, Tim Marshall and the Prisoners of Geography, it's talking about that route to the sea, because during the winter, most of the season are no good to them. And so that's you're going back to Peter the Great there. So historically, that's absolutely true. But, this invasion of Ukraine was actually in 2014, and the world averted its eyes because, as you were saying, Eddie, Putin had been the blue-eyed boy, and it was like, it's not been so good recently, but there's still an awful lot of money coming through the UK. And that's around the time when Osborne and Cameron were quite happy to turn us into the money laundering capital of the world. And that London grad idea has been very, very pervasive. And it's why we didn't do anything. And we did, we did, didn't we? We slapped them on the wrist and said, bad Putin, don't do that. We'll suspend some oligarchs' money. And actually the idea of the asset seizing and using that to fund the fight against Ukraine would also, by the way, help the UK housing market, ironically. So there are lots of things that you could do that will have knock-on benefits. But I don't think we can say that Putin is not, I agree with Drew. That geopolitical chess has backfired. Any decision you take that pushes Sweden to wanting to join NATO and Finland tells you how badly you've messed up, because those are absolutely now existential threats to Putin's Russia that he would not have wanted. And they have worked for a very, very long time to maintain that neutrality all through the Cold War, despite provocations from both sides in Stockholm and all of those sort of places. So I don't think this is a master stroke on his, Dan. I think it's a catastrophic backfire. I've just realised we haven't heard from Rory on this question, actually. So be quiet.
Yeah, Rory?
Yeah, no, I was almost going to be agreeing with Drew, which I never thought would happen. It just goes to so I don't think I'd be able to comment on a hypothetical situation. I just don't think that would be right. All of these sort of geopolitical instances are very ever evolving, very fast changing, and there's too much sort of nuance to really pass sort of meaningful comment on that. But the bit that I don't agree with is, I am supporting our nuclear deterrent. I think it's important that as a country, the UK does maintain that Trident program, and that's where my line is on that. But when it comes to the wider thing with Russia and Ukraine, I think it's really important that any country is allowed to defend its borders against an invasion of any kind. So it is really important that support continues until the conclusion of it. And I do hope that happens soon. I think it's gone on for far too long already, and it does need to come to an end.